They told me to leave. Right there at Christmas dinner in front of everyone, my own mother said I was embarrassing the family and asked me to go. But when I walked into that upscale restaurant later that night, still in my old combat boots and thrift store dress, the waiter looked up and said two words that changed everything. "Welcome back, owner." I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how being thrown out of Christmas dinner became the moment my family finally understood who I really was. They told me to leave. Right there at Christmas dinner, in front of everyone, my own mother said I was embarrassing the family and asked me to go. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But when I walked into that upscale restaurant later that night, still in my old combat boots and thrift store dress, the waiter looked up and said two words that changed everything. "Welcome back, owner." I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how being thrown out of Christmas dinner became the moment my family finally understood who I really was. My sister Jessica was everything our family celebrated. MBA from Wharton, senior partner at a prestigious law firm in Manhattan, designer everything from her Louboutin heels to her perfectly styled blonde hair. She lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, drove a Tesla, and posted Instagram photos from Michelin-starred restaurants every weekend. Me? I was the family's uncomfortable truth. The daughter who chose the army over college, who came back from 3 tours in Afghanistan with scars they couldn't see and stories they didn't want to hear. While Jessica was climbing corporate ladders, I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom, working odd jobs, and trying to figure out how to translate explosive ordnance disposal specialist into civilian speak that didn't make people uncomfortable at dinner parties. Christmas at our parents' house in suburban Connecticut was always Jessica's show. She'd arrive in her spotless white Mercedes, arms full of expensive gifts wrapped in paper that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Our parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, would light up like she was bringing Christmas itself through the front door. "Jessica's bonus this year was incredible," Mom would announce to anyone within earshot. "She's thinking of buying a place in the Hamptons." Then I'd walk in wearing my best attempt at holiday-appropriate clothing, usually something from Target that I'd had for 3 years, and the energy would shift. Not disapproval exactly, but something more painful, pity mixed with disappointment. "Sarah's still figuring things out," Dad would explain to relatives, his voice carrying that careful tone people use when discussing someone's unfortunate diagnosis. "The transition has been challenging." What they didn't understand was that I wasn't lost. I was building something. Every morning at 4 a.m., I was at the local community college taking business courses. Every weekend, I was working double shifts at Marco's Diner, not just for the money, but to learn. I watched how they managed inventory, how they handled difficult customers, how they kept costs down while maintaining quality. I'd saved every penny from my military service, lived like a monk for 2 years, and had a plan that would have impressed any business school professor. But to my family, I was just the daughter who couldn't get her act together. This particular Christmas was worse than usual. Jessica had just made partner and was dating someone she called a beautiful human, who worked in private equity. She spent the entire dinner talking about their ski trip to Aspen and their plans to summer in the vineyard. I sat quietly, picking at my food, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to my discharge ceremony 3 years earlier. It was clean, appropriate, but not designer. My combat boots peeked out from underneath because they were the only dress shoes I owned that didn't hurt my feet after standing for 12-hour shifts. "Sarah, you're so quiet," Aunt Margaret said, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that feels more like judgment. "What have you been up to?" Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in with a laugh that cut like glass. "Oh, Sarah's still finding herself. Aren't you, sis? Still working at that little diner?" The table went silent except for the clinking of silverware. I felt every eye on me, measuring, pitying, dismissing. I wanted to tell them about the business plan I'd been perfecting for months, about the location I'd been scouting, about the dream that kept me going through every difficult day since I'd come home. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Yeah, still figuring it out." But what they didn't know was that tomorrow, everything was going to change. For 18 months, I'd been quietly working on something that would have shocked my family if they'd bothered to ask. While they saw me as the struggling veteran who couldn't adapt to civilian life, I was methodically building the foundation for something extraordinary. It started during my second tour in Afghanistan, in a forward operating base outside Kandahar. Our unit had been stationed there for 6 months, eating nothing but MREs and whatever the mess hall could scrape together. The food was functional but soulless, designed to fuel soldiers, not nourish human beings who were thousands of miles from home and everything familiar. That's when I met Amara, a local translator who worked with our intelligence team. During a rare, quiet evening, she invited me to her family's compound for dinner. I expected military protocol to prevent it, but our commanding officer, Captain Maria Rodriguez, surprised me. "Mitchell, you've been on point for every dangerous mission for 3 months. You've earned this. Go eat some real food." Walking into Amara's home was like stepping into another world. The smell hit me first. Cardamom, saffron, fresh bread baking in a clay oven. Her grandmother, despite having every reason to distrust American soldiers, welcomed me with a warmth that brought tears to my eyes. She didn't speak English, but she didn't need to. Food was its own language. Ha, kiris and tower. The meal was simple but profound. Lamb seasoned with herbs I couldn't identify, rice that had been cooked with care and intention, bread that was still warm from the oven. But what struck me most was the way the family gathered around the food. Despite living in a war zone, despite having lost family members to violence, they had created this sacred space where love was expressed through cooking and sharing meals. "Food is how we remember who we are," Amara translated as her grandmother spoke. "When everything else is taken, we still have the way we feed our people." That night, lying in my bunk, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. I started paying attention to food in a way I never had before. I watched how different cultures within our base prepared their meals when they had the chance. I learned that Sergeant Davis from Louisiana could make jambalaya with military rations that somehow tasted like home. I discovered that Private Chen from San Francisco could transform the most basic ingredients into something that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen in Chinatown. When I came back stateside, that lesson stayed with me. While my family saw me working at Marco's Diner as a sign of failure, I was actually conducting research. I wasn't just serving food. I was studying every aspect of the restaurant business, how Marco, the owner, managed his costs, how he dealt with difficult suppliers, how he built relationships with regular customers who became like family. Loyalty. But more importantly, I was learning about the power of food to create community. I watched how the diner became a gathering place for people who might otherwise have nothing in common. Construction workers sharing coffee with college students. Elderly couples celebrating anniversaries at the same booth they'd used for 20 years. Single mothers grabbing quick dinners with their kids, finding a moment of peace in the chaos of their lives. I started keeping detailed notes in a notebook I carried everywhere. Recipe ideas, business strategies, observations about what made customers feel welcome or uncomfortable. I researched food costs, labor expenses, lease agreements. I studied successful restaurants in nearby towns, analyzing what made them work. Every penny I saved went into a special account I'd opened at a credit union downtown. My military benefits, my wages from the diner, the small disability check I received for the hearing loss from an IED blast in Helmand Province, it all went toward my goal. By Christmas 2023, I had $127,000 saved and a business plan that detailed every aspect of opening my own restaurant. Not just any restaurant, but one that would serve as a community gathering place, honoring both my military experience and the lessons I'd learned about the power of food to heal and connect people. The location I'd been scouting was perfect, a historic building downtown that had housed restaurants for over 60 years. The current owner was retiring and looking for someone who understood the responsibility of carrying on that legacy, but my family knew none of this. To them, I was still just Sarah, the daughter who couldn't figure out her life. The conversation that shattered everything started innocently enough. I'd been sitting quietly through most of Christmas dinner, listening to Jessica describe her latest case, something involving a merger that would net her firm millions in fees. The extended family hung on every word like she was revealing state secrets. And the best part, Jessica said, swirling her wine glass, is that we'll probably be featured in the Wall Street Journal for this deal. Can you imagine? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Mitchell name and the WSJ, everyone murmured appreciatively. Dad beamed with pride. Mom actually clapped her hands together, like Jessica had just announced she'd won a Nobel Prize. That's when Uncle Tom, Dad's brother who'd had too much wine, decided to be helpful. Sarah should be proud to have such a successful sister. Maybe Jessica can help you network. Find something more professional. The table went quiet. I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest, the same feeling I'd get when incoming mortars were headed for our base. Danger approaching. Sarah's doing fine, Mom said quickly, but her tone suggested the opposite. She just needs more time to adjust. Adjust to what? Aunt Margaret asked. The war's been over for years. At some point, you have to move forward. I should have stayed quiet. I should have nodded and smiled and let them continue believing their version of my story. But something in me snapped. Actually, I said, setting down my fork carefully, I have been moving forward. I've been working on opening my own restaurant. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica looked at me like I'd announced I was planning to become a circus performer. A restaurant? Dad said slowly. Sarah, honey, do you have any idea how many restaurants fail in their first year? It's something like 80%. Actually, it's closer to 60%, I corrected. And most of those failures are due to inadequate planning and insufficient capital. I've spent 2 years researching. With what money? Jessica interrupted, her lawyer voice sharp and dismissive. You work at a diner, Sarah. You live in Mom and Dad's basement. Where exactly would you get the money to open a restaurant? I felt every eye at the table focused on me. The weight of their disbelief was crushing. I've saved. Saved what? Mom's voice was gentle but devastating. Sweetheart, we know you're struggling. There's no shame in it. But this restaurant idea, it's not realistic. Uncle Tom leaned forward. Sarah, maybe you should consider something more stable. The post office is hiring. Good benefits pension plan. The post office? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. There's no shame in honest work, Dad added. Not everyone can be an entrepreneur. It takes a special kind of person. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Jessica was special. I was not. Look, Jessica said, and I could hear her trying to be kind, which somehow made it worse. I know you want to prove something, but this restaurant fantasy isn't helping you move forward. Maybe it's time to accept some professional help. There are therapists who specialize in veteran transition issues. I don't need therapy, I said, my voice stronger now. I need my family to believe in me. We do believe in you, Mom said quickly. We just want what's best. No, I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You want me to disappear. You want me to become small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps you think I deserve. Sarah, Dad's voice held a warning. You're embarrassing yourself, Jessica said sharply. And you're embarrassing us. Mom nodded slowly. Maybe you should go, honey, until you can be more reasonable. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood but had never known my heart. They were all staring at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, like I was a problem they couldn't solve. Fine, I said quietly. I'll go. I walked out wearing my combat boots and my 3-year-old dress, carrying nothing but my keys and my phone. But what they didn't know was that tomorrow morning, I had an appointment that would change everything. I spent Christmas night in my car, parked outside the 24-hour diner where I worked, staring at my phone and trying to decide whether to drive back home or keep driving until I ran out of gas. The humiliation burned worse than the Connecticut winter air seeping through my old Honda's windows. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I'd been hoping to see for weeks. Vincent Rossetti, the owner of the historic Riverside building downtown. The space that could house my restaurant dreams, if I could convince him I was worthy of carrying on its legacy. Sarah? Vincent here. Listen, I know we had an appointment scheduled for next week, but something's come up. Another potential buyer is flying in from Boston this afternoon. Cash offer, ready to close immediately. My heart sank. Mr. Rossetti, Hold on, let me finish. Thing is, this Boston guy wants to tear out everything, turn it into some trendy fusion place with no soul. Been talking to my old customers, and they're not happy about it. Mrs. Chen, from the flower shop next door, actually cried when she heard. I gripped the phone tighter. What are you saying? I'm saying if you want this place, if you're serious about what you told me, about honoring the history, keeping it a real neighborhood gathering spot, then you need to get down here today. Bring your financials, bring your business plan, and be ready to make this happen. Today? Mr. Rossetti, it's December 26th. Sarah, I've been in this business for 43 years. I can tell when someone has the heart for it and when they're just looking for a quick profit. You remind me of myself when I was starting out. But I need to know you're serious. I need to know you're ready to fight for this dream. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My makeup was smudged from the emotional wreckage of last night, my hair was disheveled, and I was wearing yesterday's clothes. But for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Purpose. I'll be there in 2 hours, I said. Good. And Sarah, bring that military backbone you told me about. You're gonna need it. I drove home quickly, showered, and put on my one good suit, the same navy blue one I'd worn to my military discharge ceremony. As I gathered my business plan, financial documents, and loan pre-approval letters, I could hear my parents moving around upstairs. They didn't come down to see me. The Riverside building sat on Main Street like a grand old lady who'd seen better days but still maintained her dignity. Built in 1924, it had housed 3 generations of family restaurants. The current space still held traces of its history. Original hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Exposed brick walls that had witnessed countless family celebrations and community gatherings. Vincent met me at the front door. A sturdy man in his 70s with paint-stained hands and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him stood his daughter Maria, who managed his properties, and Tom Bradley, the longtime contractor who'd maintained the building for 20 years. Before we talk numbers, Vincent said, I want to hear your vision again, not the business stuff. I want to know what this place means to you. I stood in the middle of that empty dining room, sunlight streaming through windows that had watched this neighborhood grow and change for nearly a century, and I told them about Amara's grandmother. About how food could be a bridge between different worlds. About how veterans like me needed places where we could gather without judgment. Where our experiences were honored rather than pathologized. This isn't just about serving meals, I said. It's about creating a space where people can remember who they are and discover who they might become. Maria smiled. Tom nodded approvingly. And Vincent extended his hand. Let's make a deal. The first month of renovations revealed something I hadn't expected when I'd signed the lease papers with shaking hands and a heart full of hope. The Riverside building wasn't just a historic property. It was a lifeline for people who had nowhere else to go. I discovered this on a freezing January morning when I arrived early to meet the electrician. There, sleeping in the doorway alcove, was an elderly man wrapped in military-issued blankets. A faded Marine Corps tattoo was visible on his weathered hand. Sir? I said gently. Are you okay? He startled awake, immediately alert in that way only military people understand. Sorry, miss, I'll move along. Didn't mean to cause trouble. Wait, I said. What's your name? Frank Kowalski. Staff Sergeant, retired. His voice carried the formality of someone who'd spent decades following orders. How long have you been sleeping here, Frank? He looked embarrassed. Just since the Riverside Cafe closed 3 months ago. Used to eat breakfast there every morning for 12 years. When Mr. Vincent shut it down, I didn't know where else to go. That's when the truth hit me like an IED blast. The Riverside hadn't just been a restaurant. It had been a sanctuary. Over the next few weeks, as word spread that someone was reopening the space, they started coming. Vietnam veterans who'd spent their mornings at the counter, sharing coffee and war stories nobody else wanted to hear. Elderly widows who'd celebrated anniversaries there with husbands now buried in veterans' cemeteries. Single mothers who'd brought their children for affordable meals when money was tight. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop next door told me the most heartbreaking story. My husband and I came here on our first date in 1987. Every anniversary for 32 years we had dinner at table 6 by the window. When he died last year I kept coming, just to sit at our table and remember. I learned that the previous owner, Mr. Martinez, had quietly provided free meals to homeless veterans. He'd never advertised it, never made a show of it. If someone came in who was clearly struggling, hungry, and had served their country, they ate for free. No questions asked. The local VA social worker, Jennifer Hayes, came by during my second week of renovations. "I heard someone was reopening this place," she said. "I hope you'll continue what Martinez was doing. This neighborhood has 43 homeless veterans. The Riverside was the only place they could go and maintain their dignity." I walked her through my plans for the renovation, but she stopped me when I mentioned the seating layout. "You need to keep table 6 exactly where it is," she said firmly. "Mrs. Chen still comes by every Tuesday and sits outside, just staring at the empty window. And that corner booth? That's where the Wednesday morning veterans group met for 8 years. Unofficial, no counselors, just guys who understood each other." The weight of responsibility was crushing. I hadn't just bought a restaurant. I'd inherited a community's heart. These people weren't just potential customers. They were people who'd been left behind by a society that thanked them for their service, but forgot about them when the cameras stopped rolling. I sat in the empty dining room that night, surrounded by construction dust and paint samples, and realized the true scope of what I was taking on. This wasn't about proving my family wrong or building a successful business. This was about rebuilding a lifeline for people who'd served their country and been forgotten. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom said you're actually going through with this restaurant thing. Hope you know what you're doing." I stared at the message and deleted it without responding. Hope you know what you're doing. She had no idea what I was doing, but I was beginning to understand that maybe that was the point. 3 weeks into renovations, my parents showed up unannounced. I was on my hands and knees, scraping 40 years of grime off the original hardwood floors, when I heard Dad's voice cutting through the construction noise. "Sarah, we need to talk." I looked up to see them standing in the doorway, dressed like they were attending a funeral. Mom clutched her purse with white knuckles. Dad's jaw was set in that way that meant he'd rehearsed this conversation. "How did you find me?" I asked, not getting up from the floor. "Vincent Rossetti called us," Mom said, her voice tight. "He was concerned about you. Said you'd signed a lease for this place and were in over your head." That stung. Vincent had been the first person to believe in my vision, and now he was second-guessing me to my parents. Dad pulled out his phone and started reading. "Do you know the statistics on restaurant failures, Sarah? 60% close within the first year. 80% within 5 years. The average startup cost is $275,000, and most new owners work 80-hour weeks for less than minimum wage." "I've done my research, Dad." "No, you've done wishful thinking," he continued. "This isn't a business plan, it's a fantasy, and we're not going to stand by and watch you destroy your future." Mom stepped forward, her voice softer but somehow more devastating. "Sweetheart, we've been talking to Dr. Reynolds at the VA. He says this kind of grandiose planning is common in veterans dealing with adjustment disorders. You're trying to prove something that doesn't need proving." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You called a psychiatrist about me?" "We're worried about you," Dad said. "This whole restaurant obsession started after Christmas dinner. It's clearly a reaction to feeling excluded from Jessica's success." I stood up slowly, construction dust covering my old jeans and work boots. "You think this is about Jessica? Isn't it?" Mom asked. "You've never shown any interest in food service before. Now suddenly you're going to be a restaurateur?" "Sarah, be honest with yourself. They'd driven 40 minutes to stand in my future restaurant and tell me I was having a mental breakdown. The same people who'd asked me to leave Christmas dinner were now trying to save me from my own ambitions." "We've talked to a lawyer," Dad said. "The lease you signed can be broken if you're deemed mentally unfit to enter into contracts. Dr. Reynolds said he'd be willing to write a letter." The room went silent except for the sound of traffic outside and a dripping faucet in the kitchen. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and preparing for my entire life. The choice between their version of safety and my version of truth. "Get out," I said quietly. "Sarah," Mom started. "Get out," I yelled, my voice echoing off the empty walls. "You want to have me declared mentally unfit? Go ahead and try. But you will not stand in my restaurant and tell me I'm crazy for believing in something." Dad's face hardened. "If you go through with this, don't come crying to us when it falls apart. We won't be there to pick up the pieces." "Good," I said. "I never asked you to." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We're trying to protect you." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "You're trying to control me, there's a difference." They left without another word. Through the window I watched them drive away in Dad's pristine Lexus, probably already calling Jessica to report on my latest breakdown. I stood alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the tools and dreams of a future they couldn't see. And for the first time since coming home from Afghanistan, I felt completely free. The grand opening of Riverside Veterans Table was nothing like I'd imagined. No ribbon cutting, no local politicians posing for photos, no review from the food critic at the Hartford Courant. Just me, unlocking the doors at 6 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in March, hoping someone would show up. Frank Kowalski was my first customer, standing outside in his cleanest clothes, still worn but pressed with military precision. Behind him was a line of people I'd come to know during the renovation. Mrs. Chen with her Tuesday morning flowers, 3 Vietnam veterans from the informal coffee group, and Jennifer Hayes from the VA with 2 clients I'd never met. "Welcome to your table, Sergeant," I said to Frank, gesturing toward the corner booth the Wednesday morning group had claimed as their own. "It's beautiful, Sarah," he said, and I saw his eyes mist over. "Feels like coming home." What happened next was something I couldn't have planned or predicted. Word spread through the veteran community faster than wildfire. By noon, every seat was filled. By evening, there was a waiting list. But it wasn't just the food that drew them. Though the Afghan-inspired lamb stew I'd learned from Amara's grandmother was already becoming legendary. It was the atmosphere I'd created. Military challenge coins hung behind the bar. A photo wall displayed pictures of local veterans throughout the decades. And in the corner, a small memorial table with a single candle honored those who didn't make it home. The breakthrough moment came 2 weeks later, when a local news reporter, David Martinez, came in for lunch. I'd served him without knowing who he was, just another customer ordering the pulled pork sandwich and asking for extra pickles. He stayed for 3 hours, talking to customers, observing the interactions, watching how former enemies from different wars sat at the same counter sharing stories. Vietnam veterans mentoring Iraq war vets. Korean War survivors laughing with Afghanistan veterans about the universal experience of military food. "I've been a journalist for 20 years, David told me as he paid his check. "I've never seen anything like what you've built here. This isn't just a restaurant. It's a healing space." "That was always the goal," I said. "Would you mind if I wrote about it? I think people need to hear this story." The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition under the headline, "From Combat Boots to Kitchen, Local Veteran Creates Haven for Heroes." But it wasn't just about me. David had captured the essence of what Riverside Veterans Table had become, a place where service members could transition from warriors to civilians without losing their identity. The story went viral. Within hours, it was shared thousands of times on social media. Veterans from across New England started making pilgrimages to our small town. Food Network called asking about featuring us in a segment about community restaurants. But the moment that changed everything happened 3 days after the article was published. I was working the dinner rush when I looked up to see a familiar face at the hostess station. Jessica stood there in her designer coat and heels, looking completely out of place among the flannel shirts and military caps of my regular customers. She wasn't alone. Behind her were Mom, Dad, and a man I didn't recognize in an expensive suit. "Sarah," Jessica said, her voice uncertain, "we need to talk." I handed my order pad to Maria, Vincent's daughter who'd become my assistant manager, and walked over to my family. "Table for 4? I asked, my voice professionally neutral. "Actually," the man in the suit said, extending his hand. I'm James Morrison from the Small Business Administration. We'd like to discuss a federal grant opportunity. Your restaurant model could be replicated nationwide. My family stood there looking at me like they were seeing me for the first time. And maybe they were. The meeting with James Morrison from the Small Business Administration should have been the triumphant moment I'd dreamed of. Instead, it became the moment I realized that success comes with its own set of complications. We sat at table 6, Mrs. Chen's memorial table, while Morrison explained the federal grant opportunity. The government wanted to fund a pilot program creating veteran-focused community restaurants in 20 cities across the country. They were offering $2 million in initial funding, with me as the lead consultant. Your model is exactly what we've been looking for, Morrison said, spreading papers across the table. Community-based, veteran-operated, with demonstrated success in addressing homeless veteran issues and PTSD transition challenges. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I felt a growing unease as I watched my family's faces. Dad was doing mental calculations, probably figuring out how much money I'd be making. Mom was smiling that proud smile she usually reserved for Jessica's achievements. And Jessica looked like she was seeing me for the first time. There would be travel involved, Morrison continued. Congressional testimony, media appearances, speaking engagements. You'd essentially become the face of veteran entrepreneurship for the federal government. That's when I understood the true cost of my success. The quiet sanctuary I'd built for forgotten veterans was about to become a political showcase. I need some time to think about it, I said. Morrison looked surprised. Ms. Mitchell, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Most people would jump at. I'm not most people, I interrupted, and I saw Frank Kowalski at the counter smile into his coffee. After Morrison left, my family stayed. The restaurant was quieter now, just the evening regulars and the soft jazz I played after 8 p.m. Sarah, this is incredible, Jessica said, her voice filled with genuine excitement. Do you realize what this means? You could be testifying before Congress. You could be on national television. I could also lose everything that makes this place special, I replied. Dad leaned forward. Sweetheart, you can't let fear hold you back. This is your chance to make a real impact. Fear? I stood up, anger flashing through me. You think I'm afraid? I've been shot at in 3 different countries. I've defused bombs with my bare hands. I've carried wounded soldiers through minefields. And you think I'm afraid of success? The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Every veteran in the place was watching this conversation unfold. That's not what he meant, Mom said quickly. No, that's exactly what he meant, I said. 4 months ago, you tried to have me declared mentally unfit for signing a lease on this place. You said I was having delusions of grandeur. Now that there's government money and media attention involved, suddenly I'm not crazy anymore? Jessica looked uncomfortable. Sarah, we were wrong. We can admit that. Can you? Because I remember Christmas dinner very clearly. I remember being told I was embarrassing the family. I remember being asked to leave because my dreams weren't realistic enough for your holiday table. The truth was spilling out of me like blood from a wound I'd kept carefully bandaged for months. You want to know what the real price of this success is? I continued. It's watching people who never believed in me suddenly want to claim credit for what I've built. It's having my quiet haven turned into a political statement. It's losing the very thing that made this place sacred. Frank Kowalski stood up from his stool at the counter. Excuse me, folks, he said in his gravelly voice. I don't mean to interrupt family business, but I think you should know something. He walked over to our table, his old Marine Corps bearing evident in every step. Your daughter didn't just open a restaurant, he said, looking directly at my parents. She saved my life. 3 months ago, I was sleeping in doorways and wondering if anyone would even notice if I didn't wake up. This place gave me back my dignity. Other customers started standing up. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop, Tom Bradley, the contractor who'd helped with renovations, Jennifer Hayes from the VA. One by one, they approached our table. She gave me a place to remember my husband, Mrs. Chen said quietly. She hired my son when no one else would, added another voice. She feeds people who can't afford to pay, said Jennifer. No questions asked, no paperwork, no shame. I watched my family absorb these testimonials, and I saw something shift in their expressions. For the first time, they were seeing the real cost and the real value of what I'd built. When the last customer had spoken, the restaurant fell silent again. "So," I said to Morrison's business card still lying on the table, "the question isn't whether I'm afraid of success. The question is whether I'm willing to sacrifice the soul of this place for recognition that should never have mattered in the first place." The decision came to me at 3 a.m., sitting alone in the empty restaurant, with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of everything I'd built. I called James Morrison and told him I would accept the federal grant, but with conditions. The program would focus on supporting local veteran entrepreneurs, not creating a political showcase. The restaurants would remain community-owned and operated, not corporate franchises. And most importantly, every location would maintain the sacred space principle, a place where veterans could heal without cameras or publicity. Morrison was quiet for a long time. "These conditions will require congressional approval," he finally said. "Then I guess we'll see how much they really want this program to succeed," I replied. 6 weeks later, I found myself in Washington, D.C., sitting in a committee hearing room that seemed designed to make people feel small. The mahogany panels, the formal portraits, the rows of representatives who looked like they'd never missed a meal. It was the opposite of everything my restaurant represented. But when I spoke, I didn't talk about policy or statistics. I told them about Frank Kowalski sleeping in doorways, about Mrs. Chen eating alone at table 6 every Tuesday, about the Vietnam veteran who'd told me that my restaurant was the first place in 40 years where someone thanked him for his service and actually meant it. "Veterans don't need charity," I said into the microphone. "We need community. We need purpose. And we need the chance to serve our country in a different way when the wars are over." The room was completely silent when I finished. Then Representative Sarah Martinez, a former Air Force pilot, started clapping. Others joined her until the entire committee was applauding. The program was approved unanimously. But the real recognition came 3 months later, on a busy Saturday evening at Riverside Veterans Table. I was expediting orders in the kitchen when Maria burst through the swinging doors. "Sarah, you need to come out here. Now." I expected to see an angry customer, or maybe a problem with the payment system. Instead, the entire dining room had gone quiet. Every veteran, every family, every regular customer was standing and facing the kitchen door. Frank Kowalski stood at the front, holding a framed certificate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in his commanding voice, "it is my honor to present Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell with the Veterans of Foreign Wars Community Service Award, recognizing her outstanding dedication to veteran welfare and community building." The applause was thunderous. I stood there in my chef's apron, covered in flour and barbecue sauce, trying not to cry as Frank pinned a medal to my shirt. But the moment that truly changed everything happened after the ceremony. When the crowd had settled back into their conversations and meals, Jessica approached me at the bar, no longer wearing designer clothes but simple jeans and a sweater. "I quit Goldman Sachs," she said without preamble. I nearly dropped the glass I was cleaning. "What?" "I gave my notice yesterday. I've been accepted to the nonprofit management program at Columbia. I want to work in veteran services." I stared at my sister, looking for the punchline or the catch. "Jessica, you spent 12 years building that career. I spent 12 years making rich people richer," she said, echoing our conversation months earlier. "You spent 3 years building something that actually matters. I want to learn how to do that." She pulled out a business plan, neatly typed and professionally bound. "I've been working on this for weeks. A foundation that provides startup funding for veteran-owned businesses. Not government grants with strings attached, but real community investment." I flipped through the pages, seeing charts and projections and financial models that looked like Jessica's work, but with heart behind them. "I need a partner," she said. "Someone who understands what veterans actually need. Someone who's built something real." For the first time in our lives, Jessica was asking for my help instead of offering hers. "There's something else," she said, her voice softer now. "Mom and Dad want to invest. They're the first donors to the foundation. Dad said to tell you he's sorry it took him so long to understand what you were building." Through the restaurant window, I could see my parents sitting in Dad's car in the parking lot, waiting to see if I'd accept their apology. "They're afraid to come in," Jessica continued. "They think you might not want to see them." I looked around at my restaurant, at Frank teaching a young Iraq veteran how to play chess, at Mrs. Chen sharing photos of her grandchildren with a table of Marines, at the memorial wall where dozens of names honored those who didn't make it home. "Tell them to come inside," I said. "There's always room at this table." 2 years later, I stand in the kitchen of Riverside Veterans Table, watching the morning rush through the pass-through window. Frank Kowalski is training a new volunteer, a young woman who served in Syria and came home to find that her engineering degree couldn't fill the hole where her sense of purpose used to be. Mrs. Chen is at table 6, but she's not alone anymore. She's teaching origami to a group of military children whose parents are deployed overseas. The federal grant program has opened 17 restaurants across the country, each one uniquely reflecting its community while maintaining the core mission of healing through service. I travel to new locations twice a month, not as a political figurehead, but as a consultant helping other veterans build their own sacred spaces. Jessica's foundation has funded 43 veteran-owned businesses in the past 18 months. She works from a small office above the flower shop, and every Tuesday she has lunch at the restaurant, comparing notes with entrepreneurs who are turning their military skills into civilian purpose. She's learned to listen more than she talks, a skill that served her better than any MBA course. My parents come for dinner every Sunday now. Dad helps with the books. Turns out his accounting background is useful for something besides corporate profits. Mom volunteers with the military family support group that meets here every other Thursday. They're not trying to fix me anymore. They're trying to understand what they missed for so many years. But the moment that defines this new chapter happened last month, when a familiar face walked through the front door during the dinner rush. Captain Maria Rodriguez, my former commanding officer from Afghanistan, was in town for a conference and had heard about the restaurant. "Mitchell," she said, and I snapped to attention automatically before catching myself and laughing. "At ease, soldier," she said with a grin. "I'm here as a customer, not your CO." Over dinner, she told me about the challenges facing veterans in her current post at the Pentagon, about the statistics on veteran unemployment and suicide rates that keep her awake at night. "What you've built here," she said, gesturing around the dining room, "this is what we should have been providing all along. Not just job training or counseling, but community, purpose, a way to keep serving." "It started with something you taught me," I said. "Remember what you told me when I wanted to help Amara's family? You said I'd earn the right to eat real food, to remember I was human. This place is about helping veterans remember they're human, while still honoring the part of them that will always be soldiers." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I'm retiring next year. Been thinking about what comes next." 3 weeks later, she called to ask about opening a location near Fort Bragg. The success hasn't erased the years of feeling invisible or the pain of being dismissed by the people who should have seen me first. But it's given those experiences meaning. Every veteran who finds community here, every family that discovers they're not alone in their struggles, every moment of healing that happens around these tables. It all springs from the night I was asked to leave Christmas dinner for daring to dream too big. I've learned that sometimes the people who abandon us aren't the ones who define our worth. Sometimes the family that matters most is the one we choose to serve. And sometimes being thrown away is just the first step toward discovering who we were meant to become. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a veteran, a restaurant owner, and someone who learned that the most powerful word in the English language isn't please or thank you, it's welcome. And there's always room at this table for anyone who's served, anyone who's struggled, anyone who needs to remember that they belong somewhere. Welcome home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.